All Quiet on the Western Front 2022 edition. So I've seen an awful lot of criticism of this Netflix adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front. You know what? It's not unreasonable to compare the movie or a remade movie to its forebears. We do it all the time. Ghostbusters and all that good stuff. A lot of people are going ham on the realism or the lack thereof during large parts of the movie. And you know what? That's fair too. But I think what a lot of these commentaries have been missing are the subtle points where people who've never been to war and never seen combat really missed. Now, it's not going to be an exhaustive review or even an extensive one. I'm only going to focus on a few points during this movie, and this is simply my take on this one particular version, and I'm treating it in a vacuum. So there are more qualified cinema experts who can break down finer points and historians who will niggle over patterns of rivets on one Maxim model or another. You know what? That's not my jam, and that's not what I'm here to do. And by no means do I want to disparage the institution of the military and its soldiers. I am a soldier myself. I'm a veteran. I've been in combat. It's a special breed who are going to willingly sign the dotted line and put their life on the line for something so ethereal as civic pride, nationhood, or to defend one's neighbor if they cannot defend themselves. It's something to be respected, but it should also be able to withstand scrutiny. This isn't one of those videos. I'm only going to focus on a few key points that I feel were really glanced over or looked over by several of the reviews that I've read and seen. And I'm really only going to focus mainly on Paul. Like I said, I'm no cinematographer and I'm not a professional historian. I'm just a dude with some experience and a keen eye for seeing some things. So with all that out of the way and further French words, let's just get on with it. So the first thing everyone complains about is the lack of opening quote that was in the previous movies. I personally liked the removal of the quote because it set something up that just really, I think, drove the impact home. All right, we're treated to an opening quiet, a forest, a fox and her kits. One of them is nursing. And then the creeping brutality that we're almost subjected to immediately after. Like, if I had never seen war, I would have found this extremely jarring and very brutal. As it stands, I'm going to flat out tell you, this is one of the most distinctly scarring movies I've ever watched. Following the attack, we get almost a reverse Lord of War opening, where we follow the uniforms stripped off from the dead, darned with some truly foreshadowing soundtrack from the sewing machine sounding exactly like the Maxim machine guns. And then the repaired uniforms are thrust upon our story's focus, Paul. All right, just a quick little aside here, guys. Several points during this movie, there's this discordant war horn or even occasionally a snare beat out of tune. It comes really at no regular intervals and only seems to exist solely to jar the participant out of shock and focus on what's exactly happening at that moment. I really like that subtle addition to it. It just really made the soundscape that much better. And you know what? It moved it at a historically accurate period piece to what the author likely intended when he wrote the novel, which was to issue a stark warning to youth that rarely listen. There's no glory in war. There's only death, suffering, and pain. So a few minutes in, I should probably get back to my ramblings about this movie and get on with it. Paul and his friends are attending their last day of school after Paul forges his parents' signature to enlist. Not something you get away with nowadays, but back then, yeah, sure. It happened all the time. It's well documented. I may be considerably older than those boys are now, or even when I enlisted compared to them. But I remember that look. I remember that excitement, that uncertainty. It's someone who's been fed a steady diet of propaganda, of glory and imperial right. I remember it because I often heard similar stuff to it all through the early 2000s, and probably better than half my audience remembers too. I was right at the end of high school when 9/11 happened, right at recruitment age. And my family having a very, very strong military tradition, you better believe I grew up hearing similar stuff, all the cool stories. Well, willfully ignoring all of the clear psychological damage and toll that service takes on those who enlist. They asked and thought about a lot of the same dumb thoughts that 19-year and 20-year-old me thought too. But I think the movie does a far better job of conveying how hard that shock is to these boys when they finally realize what they got themselves into when those first French artillery shells rained down on them. And they hit Paul's column, and Paul tries to help his friend get his mask on before getting his own mask on. And like just being told by your commander that I don't expect you to survive the night, you know, that's a pretty big wake-up call for someone in that situation whose probably biggest worry to that point was what he was going to eat at his next meal. Yeah, so I'd say this is where reality hits those boys square in the lederhosen. And I promise this is probably going to be the only joke I'm going to make through this whole video. What I want to highlight is where a lot of these reviews seem to miss. It's how to empathize with these young men. They're being told for the first time in their lives to trust people they've never met or barely know to be in charge of their lives. And they're faintly aware that all their high school careers, they were told, the individual doesn't matter, just the nation, the state, the body as a whole. The individual doesn't matter. Now, especially during the first French barrage, it's a sobering experience. Paul experiences loss almost immediately when he turns over his friend's dead body after he's stepped on his glasses. He just spent literally like hours before holding his friend who was crying in the bunker that he wanted to go home to his mother. That's a lot to take in, especially for a young man. And I very personally recall how the first time we were told a friend had died in combat, someone we grew up through training with, someone who we knew, and to be there during the ramp ceremony, the repatriation, to feel sadness, anger, righteous indignation, survivor's guilt. These are things that go through a young man's mind, and you need to empathize with that as the character grows through the movie. Now, these are all things I don't think the average civilian quite gets, but that's okay. It's a very narrow and niche experience. Very few people go through this. And fortunately for most people in the Western world, this is something no one ever has to experience. But it does make it that much more visceral for a first-time or a civilian viewer. So the next big moment I wanted to focus on one of the most poignant moments, was when the boys were making a goose they had stolen from a local French farm. And this has a bit of foreshadowing to it, I think, that a lot of others missed, especially from Paul's first line where, when you're starving, you'll do anything. Now, following this scene is them cooking and eating the goose, and it really actually brought a smile to my face, and it does really now, because there are a few moments like this in a war zone. Moments when you and your friends, your brothers, your sisters, you have a shared moment of humanity free of the destruction and the misery you're constantly steeped in around you. And they should be treasured, they should be remembered, they what help you pull you through in your darkest moments when you're over there. And I remember my few moments that I had too. It's a beautiful scene and a moment. And the fact that it's so easily overlooked during all the other reviews, it really made me sad, because it was just out there in the open and it was so blatant, but no one seemed to catch it. And the closest analog I could give to this would be in that scene in Fury when the crew are in the tank drinking together right before they're waiting to make their last stand. Anyways, the final point I wanted to make that everyone just seemed to miss, because I feel they were focused on the wrong part of the scene, was the final battle on the day of the armistice. It was so very similar to the opening battle of the movie, at least to start with. And then as Paul enters the trench, he's locked in a mortal combat and a mortal struggle with the other French soldier, only to be run through from behind at the very last second. Literally moments before the officers call cease fire that the armistice is on. Paul is dealt his mortal wound. And the audience should be made to feel one way, that really, what was it all for? It was meant to express the utter futility of everything that the movie showed you. The whole ordeal. Because everyone was focused on Mustache von Twirlvillain sitting on his little villa back from the front lines. No one noticed that part. What was it all for? And that really is the point of the movie, the futility of war. How old men who should know better, but ignore the truth of their eyes and ears, wasting the youth of a nation to hang on to a notion whose time has passed. The movie was supposed to take part over a period of 19 to 20 months of the war, and in that time they fought over a single spit of land, a single town, back and forth. What was it all for? And that really was the point of the movie. And I really think that when Paul is killed at the end, you get a real grasp of that. I guess what I'm trying to say here, to compare this to its predecessors, does it a pretty grave injustice. Each movie was produced and made at a time to reflect the horrors of what had just happened in living memory. The Great War, Vietnam, the global war on terror, possible looming war in Europe and Asia. And they're supposed to serve as stark conversation pieces to warn the youth the children we send to fight, to demand better of their leaders, to not be so callous of the lives they throw away, to make their sacrifice a final resort. I know these are things I want for my children, and I want it for your children too. And I hope you would recognize what this movie was trying to say. Anyway, guys and gals, I'm not going to ask if you enjoyed this because this was a really super heavy topic for everyone involved. No one should be taking this too lightly. But I would ask that you maybe leave a comment. Tell me what I could do better in these videos. If you want to see more reviews of war movies as well, slap the thumbs up button. Maybe share this with a friend and subscribe. I'll produce a few other movie reviews if you guys want to. And with that, guys, I will see you on the next one. Peace.